If you asked anyone in the neighborhood about Joe Delaney, they'd tell you he was the type of man who never slowed down. At 62, he still mowed his own lawn, fixed his own gutters, and jogged every morning with his golden retriever, Max. A former high school football coach turned real estate agent, Joe had always taken pride in his stamina, so when he started feeling tired all the time, he chalked it up to aging. 62's not 42, he told his wife, Marianne, with a chuckle as he collapsed onto the couch one Saturday after just an hour of yard work. Guess I'm just getting old. Marianne, who knew Joe better than anyone, wasn't so convinced. You never get this wiped out from yard work, she said, her brow furrowed. And your color doesn't look right. You're pale. Joe waved her off. I'm fine, Mare. Probably just need to eat more iron or something. But that just tired feeling didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. Over the next few weeks, Joe started skipping his morning jogs. At open houses, he found himself leaning on counters, winded after just walking upstairs. He was napping more, forgetting small things. And every night, a dull ache gnawed at his chest. Not sharp, but constant. Still, he kept dismissing it. Probably acid reflux, he muttered, chewing antacids like candy. Or maybe that chili from last night. His doctor, Dr. Simmons, had been seeing Joe for over a decade. At his routine appointment, Joe described his symptoms, hoping for a quick fix. Doc, I've been more tired lately, just can't seem to catch up. And this pressure in my chest, it's not pain exactly. Just there. Dr. Simmons nodded, tapping at his keyboard. Well, Joe, you're in your 60s now. Slowing down a bit is perfectly normal. We'll do some blood work, maybe check your thyroid. But from what you're describing, it sounds like aging to me. Joe wanted to believe that. He really did. So he went home, told Marian it was nothing serious, and popped a few more antacids. That night, while brushing his teeth, he noticed his jaw ached. Not a lot, just enough to be annoying. He took some ibuprofen and went to bed. The next morning, he was in the middle of breakfast when the strangest sensation washed over him. Dizziness, a cold sweat, and a tight squeeze in his chest. Not unbearable, but enough to make him pause. Then, as suddenly as it came, it passed. Probably low blood sugar, he said, half laughing, half nervous. Skipped dinner last night. He never once considered it might be his heart. Later that week, Joe fainted while unlocking his car. Marian rushed him to the ER, convinced something serious was wrong. But even there, initial tests were inconclusive. His EKG looked okay. His blood pressure was slightly elevated, but nothing alarming. They chalked it up to dehydration and sent him home with instructions to rest and hydrate. And yet, the feeling lingered. The fatigue, the strange chest tightness, the occasional dizziness. Joe felt like he was losing control of his own body, and no one could tell him why. Joe Delaney was not a man who liked to complain. But 3 days after the ER visit, as he sat in his recliner with Max curled at his feet, something inside him broke. Not his body, but his confidence. I can't even walk up the stairs without getting winded, he muttered to himself. This isn't me. He looked over at Marianne, who was folding laundry and sneaking glances his way every few minutes, clearly worried. I think I need a second opinion, he finally said. Marian dropped the towel in her hands. Thank God. They made an appointment at a heart clinic across town. Took nearly 2 weeks to get in, and during that time, Joe's symptoms worsened. His appetite disappeared. He started sleeping almost 12 hours a night and still woke up exhausted. The tightness in his chest became more constant. Even Max had stopped nudging him to go on their morning jogs. He knows something's wrong, Marian whispered one evening, watching the dog rest his head on Joe's lap. When the day of the appointment finally arrived, Joe was too weak to drive. Marian took the wheel while he sat silently in the passenger seat, arms crossed, sweat gathering on his brow despite the cool weather. Dr. Patel, a soft-spoken cardiologist in her 40s, listened carefully as Joe listed his symptoms. Unlike the first doctor, she didn't interrupt. She didn't smile and call it normal aging. She asked specific questions, took notes, and ordered a full cardiac workup, EKG, blood enzymes, a stress test, and an echocardiogram. You mentioned jaw pain? She asked. Joe nodded. Off and on. Mostly at night. Ever feel nauseous or unusually sweaty? He looked at Marianne. Yeah. Sometimes. Dr. Patel's face grew more serious. Mr. Delaney, I'm going to be very direct with you. These symptoms you're describing, combined with your fatigue and the jaw pain, point to what we call a silent heart attack. Joe blinked. A what? It's a type of heart attack that doesn't present with the classic chest-clutching pain you see in the movies. It's more subtle. Fatigue, indigestion like chest pressure, shortness of breath. It's especially common in older adults, diabetics, and women, but it can happen to anyone. And it's frequently missed. But I already had an EKG, Joe protested. They said it was fine. Dr. Patel nodded. An EKG can miss things if the damage isn't recent or obvious. That's why I ordered the full panel. We'll know more once the results come in, but based on your symptoms, I'm concerned that you've already had one or more cardiac events. The room went silent. Joe stared at the floor, stunned. For weeks he had told himself this was aging, maybe stress, maybe even indigestion, but not his heart. Never his heart. Marian reached over and grabbed his hand. But I eat right, he said quietly. I jog. I don't smoke. I know, Dr. Patel said gently. But heart disease doesn't always follow the rules. Genetics, stress, even undiagnosed conditions like hypertension or high cholesterol, these all play a role. The fact that you're fit probably saved your life up to this point. Joe couldn't sleep that night. His mind raced through memories. The exhaustion, the skipped jogs, the strange pressure in his chest. He felt betrayed by his own body, and by the people who told him he was just getting old. The next day, the test results came in. Dr. Patel called with the news. You've had at least one silent myocardial infarction, and there are signs of restricted blood flow. We need to get you in for an angiogram soon. Joe hung up the phone, hands trembling. Marian stood by the kitchen counter, eyes wide with fear. It wasn't aging, he whispered. It was my heart all along. 2 days later, Joe was lying on a narrow hospital bed in a dimly lit room, and 4 in his arm and electrodes taped to his chest. The angiogram was scheduled for the afternoon. Dr. Patel had explained the procedure the day before. It would reveal any blockages in the coronary arteries. Joe stared up at the ceiling, trying to control his breathing. He wasn't afraid of hospitals. He'd been in plenty of them over the years, sports injuries, the birth of his kids, the flu once or twice. But this felt different. This wasn't about patching him up. This was about finding out whether he was a ticking time bomb. Marian sat by his side, scrolling through her phone, but her thumb hadn't moved in 5 minutes. She was just holding it, staring blankly. Neither of them had slept much. A nurse came in. Ready, Mr. Delaney? They'll take you in now. Joe offered a weak smile. As ready as I'll ever be. The procedure itself wasn't long, maybe 30 minutes. But when Dr. Patel came into the recovery room afterward, her face was grave. We found significant blockages in 2 arteries, she said. One is nearly 90% blocked. It's likely this was the cause of your silent heart attack. The other's at 70%. Marian gasped. Joe sat motionless, absorbing it. Are we talking surgery? He asked, voice rough. Not open heart, she reassured him. We're scheduling you for a stent placement first thing tomorrow. We'll insert tiny mesh tubes into the blocked arteries to keep them open. It's minimally invasive but very serious. You've been extremely lucky. Joe leaned back, eyes shut. Lucky? He'd had a heart attack. Maybe more than one. He'd been brushing them off as aging. Later that evening, after the nurse left and the room went quiet, Marion pulled her chair close to Joe's bed. Her voice broke the silence. "I almost lost you." He looked at her, guilt heavy in his chest. "I know. I should have listened to you." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You did what most people would have done. The doctor said you were fine. Everyone kept saying it was just aging. How were you supposed to know?" He didn't respond. He couldn't. All he could think about were the open houses he'd run while his heart was failing, the jogs he skipped, the pills he chewed, and how close he'd come to brushing off the last warning sign. The next morning, the stent procedure went smoothly. When Joe woke up, he felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Lightness. Not the physical kind, but something internal, like the constant pressure had finally lifted. The pain wasn't gone completely, but it was different now. Manageable. Like the monster inside him had finally been named Doctor. Patel came by his room that afternoon. "You'll need cardiac rehab, medication, and lifestyle adjustments. You're strong, Joe. You caught it just in time." He nodded slowly, letting the weight of that sentence settle in. But it was the next part that hit hardest. "We've seen an increase in silent heart attacks over the last decade, especially in people who look healthy on the outside but are carrying stress, untreated conditions, or poor sleep habits. We've got to be better at recognizing the symptoms, not just blaming age." Joe stared out the window. For weeks, he'd ignored the signals. So had his doctor. And if he'd kept ignoring them, he might not have made it to that hospital bed at all. Joe was home within 3 days of the stent procedure. The nurses said he was one of the lucky ones. No lasting damage to the heart muscle, no complications during the procedure. Still, everything felt different. The house was the same. Max still greeted him at the door with a wagging tail and expectant eyes. The TV still played reruns of old football games he used to love. But Joe didn't feel like the same man walking through that door. He was slower now. Not just in movement, but in thought, in processing the reality of what had happened. His body had been screaming for help in whispers, and he'd ignored it because those whispers didn't look like what he thought danger should look like. Silent heart attack. The term haunted him. Cardiac rehab started a week later. The facility looked like a small gym, but everyone there moved with caution, as if they'd learned the hard way not to push too far. Joe was surrounded by people from all walks of life. Men and women, some older, some younger than him. One guy in his 40s had collapsed during a soccer game with his kids. Another woman, barely 50, said she thought her heartburn was acting up for months. They all had one thing in common. They hadn't seen it coming. During a group session after his treadmill test, a counselor asked them a question that caught Joe off guard. "When did you realize it wasn't just stress or aging?" People shared quietly, hesitantly. Then Joe spoke. "When the cardiologist told me I'd already had a heart attack. That's when it hit me. I thought I was just slowing down. I told myself I wasn't 20 anymore. I almost convinced myself it was normal to feel like I was carrying a weight on my chest. Turns out I actually was." There were nods around the room. No judgment, just understanding. After rehab, Joe began making changes not just to his diet or his schedule, but to the way he viewed his own health. He asked questions now. He didn't brush off pain. He didn't assume everything was just part of getting older. And most of all, he talked. With Marianne, with his kids, with other men at the gym. He told them what a silent heart attack felt like, how misleading the signs could be, and how close he'd come to becoming another obituary that began with, "He seemed healthy." One afternoon, his daughter Katie stopped by with his grandson, Leo, who brought a crayon drawing labeled, "Grandpa's Strong Heart." Joe swallowed a lump in his throat when he saw it. He crouched down beside the little boy. "You know, buddy, this heart wasn't feeling so strong a few weeks ago, but it is now." Leo beamed. Joe smiled, ruffling his hair. "Yeah, it is now." Later that night, Joe sat on the porch watching the sunset. Marion came out with 2 cups of herbal tea and sat beside him. "You're not the same man you were 2 months ago," she said softly. Joe nodded. "I know, but in a weird way, I think I might be better." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "That's what surviving something like this does. It forces you to pay attention." They sat in silence for a moment, breathing in the cool evening air. Joe looked up at the stars and whispered to himself, "You almost missed the rest of your life. 6 months later." Joe stood behind a podium at a community health fair hosted by the local hospital. The banner behind him read, "Heart Health Awareness Month. Know the signs. Save a life." His palms were sweaty, and his tie felt a little too tight, but he wasn't nervous about speaking. He was nervous about whether anyone would listen. "I used to think heart attacks looked like what you see in movies," he began, scanning the modest crowd. A guy clutches his chest, gasps for breath, and drops to the floor. "That's what I thought I was waiting for. But that's not what happened to me." He paused, letting the quiet in the room settle. "I had a silent heart attack, or maybe 2. I brushed off the symptoms for weeks, told myself I was getting old, tired, maybe just stressed. It wasn't until my wife pushed me to get a second opinion that we found out the truth." He looked over at Marianne, sitting front row, pride shining in her eyes. "I'm here because I wasn't just getting old. I was dying. And I didn't even know it." The room was still. People leaned in. He clicked a remote, and a slide showed up on the screen behind him. The real signs of a silent heart attack. Unexplained fatigue, shortness of breath, discomfort in the chest, jaw, or upper back, nausea or lightheadedness, sweating without physical exertion, a general feeling that something is off. "These are easy to miss," Joe said, "especially if you're someone like me, active, healthy on the outside, not the typical heart attack candidate. But these symptoms are your warning lights." He shared his story in detail. The fainting, the ER doctor brushing him off, the 90% blockage, the way Max, his dog, had sensed something was wrong before even he did, and the guilt of almost leaving his family behind because he didn't trust his gut or his wife's concerns. After his talk, people approached him with their own stories. One woman said her father had died in his sleep a year ago, and she always suspected it was his heart. A man in his 60s said he'd been feeling the same chest pressure Joe described. Joe handed him Dr. Patel's card and said, "Don't wait." Back home, he launched a blog called It Wasn't Just Aging and began writing weekly posts. His goal wasn't to scare people, it was to wake them up, to tell the stories doctors sometimes miss, to be a voice for people who were told you're just tired when something deeper was happening. His story caught the attention of a local news station, and within months he was being interviewed on radio shows, podcasts, even a small appearance on a national morning news program. People connected with him because he wasn't a doctor, a celebrity, or a statistic. He was a husband, a dad, a guy who liked to grill steaks and play catch with his grandson. He was them. One evening, a letter arrived in the mail that IT was handwritten, with shaky cursive. "Mr. Delaney, I heard your story on the radio. I've been having chest tightness and thought it was just part of turning 60. I made an appointment the next day. They found a 95% blockage. I had surgery 2 days later. You saved my life. Thank you." Joe stood there in the kitchen, staring at the letter as Max pressed against his leg. "I guess this is what it's all about," he said to Marianne, who came over and read it with tears in her eyes. "No," she said. "This is what you are about now." Joe nodded slowly, the weight of the moment anchoring him. "I almost died because I trusted the wrong voice, the one that told me to stay quiet. But I'm alive now because someone finally listened. And I'm going to make damn sure others do too."